Most of the time when I come in, whether as a consultant or I'm working in the company thinks it needs the technology, whether they have a hunger for innovation today for AI. But one of the first things that I have to look at going in is, are you doing it just to do it? Are you doing it to apply it to a problem that is not a technology problem? So, like, I also have a facilitation background. A lot of times you're going in and you're separating out as like, what is actually people or communication issues, and what is it that technology can do for you? And I think a lot of times companies assume that technology will compensate for something that may just be a foundational or just may be purely a communication issue. And so walking in, it's about discerning where does things follow into that. And then two is, especially I would say in more traditional industries, there's always a hunger and a desire for the new thing, the new technology, the new innovation, the new thing that's happening. But you actually need to understand, where is the business at? And not from a good or bad standpoint, like are they way behind on what they're doing, but it's just simply what is going to be the most transformational thing for them, and what technology is going to help them and what's going to hinder them.
Hello, I'm Mike Ryan. I'm the Chief Networking Officer at PIMS, and welcome to our second season of Minutes with Mike. Now in my 33rd year at PIMS, I've had the privilege of partnering with companies both large and small, supporting their PR and marketing through customized fulfillment and distribution that delivers measurable impact on their brand perception, boosts positive affinity, and fuels their overall brand performance. And throughout my career, I've had the chance to work alongside many talented folks. This is their story. On this show, we'll sit down with some of the world's top marketing and business thought leaders to learn more about their success, how they got there, how marketing helped them achieve their goals, what strategies they used, and what inspires them. Please join me on this journey as we learn from those who are changing the way we think about business. So sit back, enjoy. You're listening to Minutes with Mike. Welcome, everybody, to Minutes with Mike. Today's guest, my friend Nick Howard, the Global Marketing and Strategy Director at Amble & Co. Welcome, Nick.
Hi, Mike. Thanks for having me on here. Long time listener and fan. So
Appreciate that. Looking forward to this episode because as Nick and I were strategizing on, what would be very cool to talk about and things that people want to hear and make it very exciting. The stuff he was saying to me, I was nodding my head a lot, pretending like I knew what he was talking about. But in reality, it's way above my pay grade. But I wanted to kind of jump in, but to give everybody sort of a little perspective on who you are and what you do. What is a global marketing and strategy director? What is it that you do?
that's a fun one, because honestly, that title, whether I was doing it as my consultancy now or whether I was in a company doing this, it's literally just a catch-all. It's essentially a person that it's just like, we want to execute all of these projects and I will just go in and figure it out. So like in previous roles, even though I was head of global strategy, is like I would create the marketing strategy, work with the marketing head of like, what's the execution pathway. At the same time, I'd be coordinating with the head of sales and BD, and then making sure that they're talking, or for major accounts, they'd be like, all right, this is a major account. It's really important. They have a lot of either technical questions or pathways that they haven't built out yet. Can you go figure out where their systems and our systems, or their marketing pathways and our marketing pathways intersect? And then I would just literally go there and figure that out. So it sounds fancy, but it's really just like a maintenance guy who goes in and figures out like what's leaking and then go fix it up.
I was thinking, everybody's got a guy, whether it's somebody that you need to, paint your house or to set up your computer system or whatever it is. Everybody's got a guy, and you for sure are probably the guy for a number of different people that need that, type of technology and that type of help. I'm sure as a kid, you were the guy that took a stereo apart, put it back together again, found all cool new ways of doing things that all your friends were drawn to, and they wanted you to do it for them.
Yeah, I was usually the tinkerer. I did never do like the full like radios and stuff, but it's just like from very early age, we always had computers in the house, like even from an Apple IIe to, I still somewhere in storage have the colored CRT iMacs. when Steve Jobs had first come back and just like generational either computers or electronics or toys. I mean, for me, I like that type of role, not only for the tinkering part, but one thing I sort of figured out about my own career trajectory or interests is I get the not very succinct way to say it is I get bored pretty easily. Meaning is like I can do things at a very high level, but like I can do something at 90% of what someone who specializes in a project can operate. But that last 5% where you end up with like mega experts, I'm just like, that's going to take a lot of dedication that I'm not in. This also looks interesting. Let me go toy and play with that.
It's always fun to get perspective from people who are outside of our world, in our world, right? When you talk about scaling and transformation, like you just mentioned in your this ever-changing world of ours, it's always good to get an outside view of people on the outside looking in. So, as far as that scaling and transformation goes, what things do you look at or focus on when you're talking to new companies or when you are vested in their what it is that they do? Because you're everywhere from dental implants to working with Estee Lauder. What are some of the things you look for?
I mean, walking in, there's a few key pieces that you're always trying to understand, which means most of the time when I come in, whether as a consultant or I'm working in the company thinks it needs the technology. Like whether they have a hunger for innovation today for AI. But one of the first things that I have to look at going in is number one, are you doing it just to do it? Are you doing it to apply it to a problem that is not a technology problem? So like I also have a facilitation background, meaning is that a lot of times you're going in and you're separating out like what is actually people or communication issues and what is it that technology can do for you. And I think a lot of times companies assume that technology will compensate for something that may just be a foundational or just may be purely a communication issue. And so walking in, it's about discerning where does things follow into that. And then two is like, especially I would say in more traditional industries, there's always a hunger and a desire for the new thing, the new technology, the new innovation, the new thing that's happening. But you actually need to understand where is the business at. And not from a good or bad standpoint, like are they way behind on what they're doing, but it's just simply is like, what is going to be the most transformational thing for them and what technology is going to help them and what's going to hinder them. And so that's part of the process of going in. So like I said, with my previous company, I would say between like marketing, I would help with the business development, account management. That's not because any particular person wasn't good at their job, but it was also something where it's just like each of those departments siloed wasn't communicating enough. And, the CEO is like, I want to implement like a new document and chatting technology that allows us to document everything. And then everyone, when they talk, they know what they're doing. And I'm gonna be like, to a degree, that makes sense. It's good to have documentation, but that is not going to fix that your account managers and your salespeople are having two different conversations with the same client. So that's a different thing to tackle than, hey, we're going to implement this brand new platform to build everything on.
I mean, the sky is just absolutely the limit on what is available to people, right? But also that raises expectations as well, because people can, bring you in and say, we need to develop this sort of program, or people are lacking this. What can we do to help the performance on this, or help me set up KPIs for my sales team or develop business development, whatever it is. What strikes me too, as you're talking, before we started the podcast, we were talking about our international travels and what airlines we felt were better than others. You are doing work across US, Europe, Asia, and really operating bilingually within. I'm curious, without naming names and company names, like, do you see like US companies having similar issues, Asia having similar issues, and the Europeans having different issues, but all within their same scope? In other words, do the Americans sort of have problems with this issue that you're helping solve, whereas the Europeans are looking at it through a different lens?
It's amazing how much the same people are, and then those differences come in maybe on a cultural level. And what I mean by that is like, no matter whether I've been working with European companies or Asian companies or American companies, I would say like 80% of what their issues are or what they're trying to achieve is within the same realm, right? Let's just stay within the beauty and skincare world because that's something that I think both of us are quite familiar with. Is I have worked with leading European skincare brands, US skincare brands, and Asian skincare brands. And all of their questions, especially around like new innovation and technology, are almost the same, right? All of them are like, okay, AI is a thing. We want to use AI. And that's great. The problem is they all literally have the same problem, which is none of them have a strategy. It didn't matter which region of the world you're in. There is no strategy to saying, I want this thing. It's what the business implementation is. But where the interesting diversity comes from is there are certain cultural elements, or even I would just say it's like regional historical elements that separate them out. Asia is such a long time and heavy manufacturing place for the last 30 to 40 years that like cost savings like is so rooted in every single decision they make. Is like, even when it comes to innovation, be like, we want all the things, but our budget is like this little tiny
It's funny
thing.
how that transcends all worlds, right? Yeah.
Yeah. But then, and then like risk tolerance, because, especially in a manufacturing world today, most of your brands know the ingredients and the cost of labor so well that when they call an Asian company to manufacture something, it's not like a back and forth negotiation. They're like, I know what your cost of materials is. I know what your cost of labor is. I can calculate like this percentage of a margin for you. And even when they transform into brand, a lot of that mindset carries over. They're like, okay, should we be the cheapest brand just because it'll be the most like value savings, even if what they can do can operate on a luxury level? And so that's where you see, like on the Asia side, they are more likely to buy a luxury brand than to build one, simply because their own inclinations are being like, this is about cost savings. Whereas, like, I think Europeans have that more artisanal thought on like how they do things. So it's like when they're thinking about transformation, they're less budget conscious, but at the same time, like they want it to be very creative. They want it to be very free flowing. And so when you're going in there, it's like technology is still a fairly regimented thing, and creativity comes because you have a foundation, but that feels restricting. And then Americans kind of just sit in this like weird middle, right? Like you think of technology coming out of here, but at the same time, just the legal structures of things is way more complicated than other countries. And so now it's just like your legal team may be the reason why you're 1 or 2 or 5 years away from an actual innovation change.
We also have in common that we work with different types of companies, right? You have your huge conglomerates, multi-billion-dollar corporations that you're working with, but you also work with the startups. And I know that you have helped secure over $150 million of funding for startups. Congratulations on that. When with startups, that is crucial. That is the number one thing that they're looking. My question to you is, what separates a company that attracts capital from one that maybe doesn't? Like in layman's terms, like what do you think the differentiator is from those small startups that attracts capital? What do you think the people that are looking to invest are looking for?
The generic advice that I see all the time is that either A, you need to have like a really good story, or you need to have really good numbers. The reality that I have seen, and most of the fundraising that I did was in like the med tech world, where science and technology matters. But the success I have seen is two things. One, a business owner who both knows his story, but he can also teach investors something interesting about the industry. Like, even within the beauty world, you have people who see something that others don't. And when they go into an investor meeting, they go, okay, the entire beauty world is doing A. This is the standard pathway. This is how they grow. This is how they acquire. For the last 6 months, I have been doing B. And B is actually showing that I have to spend less money competing against everybody else because I'm doing this. And here are my growth numbers. Anyone who can tell that story, and actually I use story loosely, is anyone who can have that conversation. I have seen literally hundreds of venture capital pitches by startups. I have never seen a startup who made it through their entire 5 or 10-minute pitch get invested. Every single time that I have seen someone successfully get investors, somewhere in the middle of their speech, an investor goes, hold on. What? Explain that to me. And it's usually because there's something, if it's a doctor, it'll usually be like, okay, our healthcare system works this way. This is how insurance payouts work. Here is what happens in an ER. This is actually the moment that matters. It is not where you do your reimbursement code. This is what matters to a patient's healthcare. If it's a beauty startup, it may be like everyone's talking about TikTok Shop, but that also means every single person is dumping money into being on TikTok Shop. I have started X number of pop-ups in these different places. I think you previously had someone who was doing a clothing company, Kumaro Clothing, and they talked about going to festivals. And that may seem like that's the old good school way of selling, is the in-person, but it's no, they could be dumping endless amounts of money into Instagram for trying to find their audience. Whereas if they go to these festivals, they know exactly who the customer is, and it's clothing only meant for them. I don't need to sell it to everyone. I sell it to this one. Again, someone who has that insight can make an investor go, wait, hold on. That doesn't make sense. And they'd be like, wow, let me tell you why it does.
I have some AI questions now. Before I get into that, I did want to ask you about podcasting too, because among everything else you wear hats for, you were also involved in podcasting, and you built a podcast that reached 1.8 million downloads. So you're the person I want to talk to about that, especially since with Minutes with Mike. So creating influence means you're creating a community around storytelling, right? The storytelling engagement is prominent and it is unique in such a way that people sort of have as I've talked to many founders and they've told me again and again, they have a way of making it their own. Their product becomes something that they do on a daily basis, something that they consistently, whether it's nutrition or beauty or fashion, whatever it is, people are bound to it. When you're talking about podcasting and building a platform, how much do you think about sort of the back end of that, the influence, the people that are watching the Minutes with Mike, right? When you're going over the technical aspects of setting it up, or you're sort of building brand around that type of communication, how much do you think about sort of what type of influence it's going to have on the people that are watching it?
Influence is a good word from the standpoint of, I think people usually define influence as a very broad scope. I'm a celebrity. If I say something, there's a huge audience that will listen to what I have to say. I typically think of influence in more of a directed scope. So when my partner and I started the podcast, it was a bilingual professional communication podcast in Mandarin and in English. And we set out with the mindset of, there are a lot of professionals across Asia, Mandarin speaking professionals, Taiwan, Singapore, Hong Kong, China. And the thought process is, there's a lot of people who sit within multinational conglomerates who are in Asia and speaking to their team in one language, but more specifically is they're using a certain cultural logic tied to that language with their team. And then they're not only translating language, but they're thinking about what is the mentality, what's the mindset to talk to their reports in Europe, in the US. We knew just naturally, because the podcast was in two languages and that it was aimed at a certain, basically, age segment and population, the audience was not going to be huge. The other half of that is we never set out to make content. I think in the end, that podcast had around 450 episodes. You could go back to episode 50. You could go back to episode 120, and it will still be relevant today. And so the mindset, and this is, kind of plays into how I look at strategy with companies, is there is no such thing as a general audience. Or there is no such thing as a general audience that is going to support you in the long term if you appeal to everybody, because essentially you appeal to nobody, right? So our podcast, even when it grew to roughly around 80,000 monthly downloads, that's a medium to large size podcast, and it was something that we're very proud of. But we didn't chase trends. Like, there are other people who maybe were trying to aim at the same audience with us, but they would follow like what's trending. Like, they would just translate like news or things like that. And I would say their numbers looked very large. But one of the things that, by narrowing and targeting a very specific audience and thinking about what are their issues and concerns, is that fueled our consulting business so hard, because we would get directors from Fortune 10 companies saying, "Hey, I listened to your podcast. You talked about this. Can you come train my team?" Or it's like, I have a presentation where like the CEO of this Fortune 50 company is going to come over and I have to report to him what we've been doing the last year. Can you come help me work on my presentation? And so our audience, and this is a podcast, sometimes you feel like you're speaking into the void. And then it's always a shock when someone comes up to you and be like, "Hey, I listened to it." And it's even better when it's like, it is someone within that audience where you're like, "Oh, holy crap. Like, I have something to say and people don't think I'm nuts." So it is a validation that I would say I'm very proud of the number that we built up. And, there are people with millions of downloads per episode. But for me, it's like, I knew in the end exactly who I was talking to, and what I was saying did have, back to your word, influence on how they thought, because I was living in their world. And whether it was me talking about my own experience or me talking about, what I've absorbed from other experts, it resonated with the right person.
Well said. You said something about podcasting that really hit home, because when you do these podcasts, originally when we started doing my podcast, we were doing it because we wanted people to be sort of have a peek behind the curtain of what it is that PIMS does and how we do it. And what it morphed into, with your help and your advice, was more of like, listen, this is a tool for getting your message across for sure, but it's also a tool that people, there are some people that are going to watch every episode. There are some people that are going to watch 2 minutes of one episode, but it's out there. It's an ether. It's something that they can grab onto, or something they may have heard that they're going to spin around and be like, "That's a great point. Let me connect with that person, or let me share that with somebody," because it really raises a good point. To me, that's kind of like the Superman moment. Like when somebody comes up to me or says, like, I saw somebody at a trade show once and he's like, "Oh, well, I watch every one of your episodes." And I was like, "You do?" Thanks. Let's shift into AI, right? So I've probably done 50 plus episodes now. We talk about AI at least for a minute in each one of them. And everybody kind of says the same thing. I don't really know where it's going or what it's doing. I just know I need to be involved, right? You said that companies should focus less on the mystique of AI and more on the parts of the business they want to scale, right? Which makes a lot of sense to me, because when I think of AI, like ChatGPT, I think about, of the million things it can do, I think of the 4 that I use it for and think that I'm advancing myself somehow. Talk to me about what you meant when you said that.
The reason I say that is because access to AI is everywhere. And I think that's incredible. Like you just said, it doesn't matter what seniority you are in your position, how long you've been working. Anyone can fire up ChatGPT. I'm a huge fan of Perplexity as far as doing research, but that's so easy to access. And I think that's amazing. But a lot of people either stop there or they think that more of that is the answer. But from sort of bridging both that traditional world within beauty CPG or manufacturing and personally working with tech startups or even doing small angel investing myself, is the most exciting things that I'm seeing are actually not like the public facing solutions. It's what's happening on an enterprise backend level that's truly transformative for businesses. But back to one of the points that we discussed at the very beginning around strategy, and this is where I get into the mystique versus the reality is, if you don't have a strategy around what parts of your business benefit and scale from AI, you can spend infinite amounts of money and get absolutely nowhere. And so one of the frameworks that I have been thinking through myself and then starting to roll out with different companies is that one, AI and technology needs to meet your company where it is. But more broadly, there are three areas where I have seen AI technology have overarching and much better results for a company. The first one being is efficiency. Efficiency can be one of two things. Efficiency can be you remove layers from your process, or you straight up remove a layer from your company. A lot of people may get into a doomsday, like, oh my God, are we going to have to fire people kind of thing? But actually, again, it's back to it's like people who use AI effectively, you cannot remove the AI from the person, but the person becomes so much more efficient and so much more effective by extending what they can do with AI. So when you're removing a layer or a process from the company, that doesn't necessarily mean the person. It just may be one of the tasks that person does so that they can take their energy and put it to something that maybe they excel at. So I think that's a big one. And this is one of the conversations that, you and I have been having, or I've been having with other people at PIMS, is like, there are certain parts of your process that AI should absolutely not touch because it's that human element. It's that white glove experience that is the difference between what does it mean when someone makes a handwritten note and what happens when a computer printed something. I had Amazon gift pack something for me and put like a printed note, and I took it off because it looks terrible. Like, I didn't want to give that gift. Like, even the printed note was askew and like one word came off the thing. That's efficiency, but that's not a business. So even within your company, it's not I apply AI to all processes. There are certain processes in your company that are non-negotiable because that is the essence of your company. But maybe every step around that, you can bring some kind of efficiency to. So efficiency is a big one. The second one is reach. Reach is in the sense of, we'll look back at the beauty world. I know you've talked to quite a few people about like TikTok Shop or social selling. The discovery point between a brand and a consumer has changed. It used to be, I see an advertisement online, I physically have to go into a store, I try it on, I pick it out, I buy it, I take it home. Even with online selling, that went from probably saw an advertisement, I went to a website, I bought it, I waited for it shipped. With social selling is like that discovery moment is now you see it, you can buy it if you want. That is very hard to compete for attention at that point. And if efficiency to the degree of capturing the moment between discovery and purchase is so important, it's not scalable to be done by human means. So in order to properly process that and go through everything, AI or technology can help. Like, what is all the data that goes into that moment? What is all the data that comes out of that transaction moment? How do you capture insight around all of that? AI is incredibly good at looking at things the way that we wouldn't. But there is still a human element of like the guidebook of how your business capitalizes that moment does not come from AI. It's still a person going, here's all the things I want to know. Here's all the marketing creatives that I want to set up. And then once that happens, I can capture it in a way that's not humanly feasible. The last thing that I've been looking about AI is the idea of new capabilities. There are certain things in a company that are very good for your company, but they are not scalable through human methods. One was a little bit of what I was just talking about, is like through business intelligence. But even back to like what PIMS does, there are going to be certain things that are hindered by humans. There are certain things that are human centric and they should be only done that way. But if you can identify, it's like there may be certain things that you guys do in your process that are human element. You should absolutely do it for the good of your business or good for your customers. But unless you want to work 3 shifts, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365, that's not feasible. But once you start finding places to plug in the technology where your non-negotiables still happen, but like some kind of like label, shipping, label adjustments, like someone can send it in rather than checking the email and adjusting, like it just auto adjusts and then you have a human check it. Some of those things could massively scale without fundamentally changing what you do.
I have 4 children. They're relatively young. They're getting started in their careers. One is in college. And depending on who you ask, some feel like this is going to change everything and there's going to be no jobs. And the other one is like, actually, you just have to look at it this way. Like I remember hearing that story about like when farm equipment first, when tractors first got brought into the mix and people were like, that's it. It's the end of farming, right? And all it did was help the farmers harvest and do things more efficiently, right? My career started at Novartis before it was even Novartis, and they didn't have a computer. They had typewriters. And I remember they were talking about, as I was segueing out of this, they were talking about getting one computer for the whole marketing department to use, but somebody had to know how to use it. And there was so much pushback on it. So when people talk about like traditional industries or the sort of, blue chip companies that have been doing things a certain way for a certain length of time, everybody knows that they need to adopt this in some way, shape, or fashion. But I think that you'll agree, maybe the scale in which you do it, right? Like it doesn't make sense to throw everything out and be like, okay, AI, how do we plug it into this? You have to beta test it internally. You have to let people, like you said, sort of touch it and feel it and get to know how it's used and work certain departments and not certain departments. What do you say when a client comes to you and goes, we're in? Plug it all in because, I want to downsize my staff by 10%. I want to increase efficiencies here and there. And I want a program that runs 24/7. So how do you kind of talk them off the ledge with that?
Well, number one, I have yet to meet a company who's willing to go all in. That would be, I would say that'd be amazing. But at the same time is actually, I think what you just said is like talk them off the ledge from the standpoint of something we touched on before, which is it's not about adopting technology. It's about integrating technology where your business is today in a way that is most effective. So it's like the first conversation that I would have with someone who's like, I want the technology, I'm all in. The first thing I would do is go, okay, where are the inefficiency in your business or where is something you would like to do better? Everyone's natural action would be like, I want to do everything better. I'm like, that's not true. Because one of the easy sort of litmus tests of that is if I go, okay, how many decisions get made by your team on a daily basis that you're okay, you have absolutely no say or purview over? And if the answer is not many, AI is not, you're not going to let technology do it any more than you would let your team do it. And AI is worse. Like one of my good friends who's a venture capitalist, he was talking about is like actually people's patience with AI is lower than anything else, which means if they try an AI product once and it doesn't work the way that they think that it should work, they will never download it again. Very few people for all the tools that are out there actually will use a tool and stick with it through its problematic phases. So it's sort of back to that thing. It's just like, you may think in theory it would be very nice for AI to do these things, but if you wouldn't even let your team do it without double checking something, you're not going to let a computer do it. So that's like almost a readiness check on one level. The other half of that, and this is where you have to remind people that we call it AI now, but all the training models that sort of built into, you hear ChatGPT or GPTs, LLMs is the fundamental term, like the machine learning. It is a learning situation. And back to it's like, where do people fit into that? If I'm walking into a company and I'm thinking about how they implement AI, the first thing I want to do is I want to look at someone who has your level of experience and be like, I want to download as much of what's in your head and your experience as possible, because that is the training guideline for the AI. I don't let the AI go crazy. I go, listen, this is the way we do things. Here is our best practices that we have learned. Here are the most efficient things that we have done. Look at this as a baseline, come up with like a plan or a thought process as a baseline. And then when we get into implementation of it, it's again, maybe an unscalable thing. I can't make 10 Mike Ryans physically. But if I can take what's in your head and I can build a solid playbook, I can take your best practices and I can implement in the business in an effective way. But I'm not doing that without you. I'm doing that as a way to scale you. And so when you go into a business, you don't go, let's AI the whole world. It's what are you world class at and how can we make a computer scale that? What is something that is inefficient? How can we use technology to plug that hole? And you're looking at it from like these different layers that build into one thing. I'm not looking at this as like AI, fix button, deploy. No one's figured that out. There's one more thing that I would add on top of that, and it actually comes from one of the, on paper, most successful companies. There's a company called Sierra AI. It was started by some like super long time Googlers. One, I think, ran like Google's moonshot factory for a long time. They were giving an interview and they were talking about they were implementing AI for customer service. This is the primary output of what they're doing. And they were talking about the victory of have someone who was a shoe company. They had a shoe, there was something wrong with the shoe. They could take a picture, AI could evaluate what it was, do the entire like refund, here's the shipping label, ship it back to us, we'll ship you a new pair of shoes. And there was no human in the process. And they were touting like, this is amazing. Personally, from a technology standpoint, I think that is amazing. But what intrigued me is that's a very technology company idea about what customer service is. Because you're missing all the other things. Like if I have a shoe that didn't work out or it was broken or shipped to me and I ship it back, maybe if I like the shoe company, I'll buy it again, maybe not. If that shoe company sends me a personal note, an email, or someone like put something in that box and said like, hey, our bad, we're really sorry, here's something, here's a handwritten note, here's a coupon for the next time. Because that's happened to me. Like I used to back Kickstarter campaigns a lot. The first round of products is never like perfect. But a lot of times, like really good Kickstarters, like they'll send you back. They'll be like, hey, we're sorry about this. Here's something for your time, or here's like a way to show that we're paying attention. You have a customer for life. So when they're describing the technology version of customer service, I'm like, you've completely missed that whole human element of a company going, our bad. Here's how I'm going to make you a loyal customer for life. You're just fixing the problem.
So many examples of that popped in my brain as you were talking. Like on the plus side, we subscribe to that dog food company, Chewy, and they are known for if you cancel your subscription, they assume something happened to your pet and they reach out to you. And if you say the dog, cat passed away, whatever, they send you a really nice note that means a lot to people that lose a pet. That's how sort of, I don't know, algorithmic thinking can go in the plus side. On the negative side, my son is about to sign a lease in Binghamton, New York with a big corporation that rents out these rooms for college kids. I've signed the lease already. I've gotten a text 4 times a week since that, inviting me to walk the space, and they're going to give me Girl Scout cookies if I consider using them. Like, I'm caught in this crazy algorithm, right? So it all goes sort of back to that governance of risk management, right? mitigating risk, that type of personalization you're talking about. People use PIMS because they want to mitigate risk. They don't want that name to be awkwardly placed on there. And they don't want, if his favorite color is red and he told us that, don't send him it in blue, and the shoe size and the shirt size, whatever it is. And when you're talking about like shade matching for cosmetics. My question is, as brands grow, they're going to want to automate things like marketing, right? They're going to want to automate things like people order stuff on TikTok Shop to immediately send them an invoice and a thank you and stuff. AI seems to be the way to sort of connect those two worlds, but there comes that risk of, if you unleash this thing without sort of pulling back on the straps a little bit, it could do more harm than good in some instances.
Yeah. No, you're 100% right in that. And this is where it comes back to is your strategy to approach AI should not be how to replace things. It should be is what guidances can I give that will then take either something I'm very good at and then expand it, or something that we need to work on and then find the gaps and improve it. I mean, the basic way to look at that is right now, most of the time, if someone used AI to write an email, right? There's certain like the little hyphen is the one that everyone talks about, but also it's just like their tone of voice. Like maybe you've emailed back this person and you get an email and you're like, what? What GRE book are you looking through that made you decide that this was the word we're using? But there are people who use AI to do guidance on their email or in their notes, but it wasn't just you put it out there. Like, again, their interaction with even, let's say it's ChatGPT is like, they very specifically said, like, this is the tone of voice I use. Here is like 10 emails that I have written before, analyze how I speak, think about it, and then here's the note that I want to say, and here's all the bullet points, right? When you do that, what gets output may be an AI assisted of what you wrote, or again, is like, even if you have a marketing funnel that it's like, the first email should be this, the second they respond, or a week later, the second is like, you can create a personalized feeling of that, but you had to write all the guidelines, right? That's not a, hey, ChatGPT, come up with this. It may come with a great answer, but like I, Nick, do that, you, Mike, do that, and then we put advertising into Instagram. Guess what? The results are the same because we have not personalized anything. And so one of the big conversations on the tech side of things is how do you create what you call like a personalized or a sovereign context layer? And this is one thing that I've been trying to work on with companies recently is like, how do you take the knowledge within your company and then put it in a place and in a way that AI can read it so that there's certain things that become more efficient because your processes are now known and can be trained on the AI. But this can even be like when a new person comes into your company, again, back to a scaling thing, there can only knock on your door a few times before you're like, dude, figure out your questions and then come back to me. But if there's what would Mike Ryan say, that's, 60 to 80% of your thoughts is like, they can look at that first. And then once they have formulated the idea, then they can knock on your door and you can give them that nuance that's not within the model, but it does allow for like training people in the team or like setting your team culture in a certain way. This is how you do things. Before there's probably a manual on it, but most people are not going to be like, let me go find the manual, let me find the page. So their first thing is going to be like, dude, Mike, how do I do this? But now go in our database, say, how do I do this? And you'll get the Mike Ryan-y answer. And if it's not enough for you, then come talk to me. But our conversation is now starting at 60, not 0.
It's such a new science, right? And I'm not even talking about like externally, because you can judge, how marketing and new development is being done based on sales or performance. That's almost a no-brainer. But when you have employees using it internally for daily functions, for processing things like invoices and stuff like that, or in our case, like how to shrink footprints on, the amount of space a warehouse can contain, how do you judge its success? If you're working with a company and they're investing X amount of dollars into AI and they're paying you and your team to sort of bring that up to speed, what do you use as sort of a judgment of like, okay, here's where it's working, here's where it's not, here's where we need to invest more, here's where we need to pull back a little bit?
Yeah. I mean, two things around that is most companies, if they're in sync with us on a mentality, the first conversation we have is like, we want AI. But if that project goes forward, is we're going to have that conversation of like, you want AI to do what? Like, let's talk through where the challenges in your business are and apply AI. I'm not going to show up and go like, you should have a corporate account. Number one, because it's not effective. Number two is because it is incredible how quickly subscribing to a bunch of AI tools, how expensive it can get. One is, yeah, they have to have their own mentality. Two is, I think we're in a very interesting time. If I go up to like a large corporate level, and I think this is where probably L'Oreal, Estee Lauder, Unilever, I think what they're struggling with is they have made big, broad announcements about their AI transformations. And I guarantee you, their legal teams are like, you are not doing that. And so we're in an interesting time where while corporates are actually trying to figure out on a larger scale how they do things in a more compliant way, the most effective things that a company can do is find individuals in the company who become very savvy at building the tools, building those guidelines, building those frameworks, and using it as like an MVP testing ground, right? Before you, and any company should do this, before you roll out any tool company wide, you should identify like people or department. We're going to figure out like how to use, we're just going to do marketing. We're going to take these X number of AI tools. We're going to figure out how to build our AI context layer in the company, and we're going to see what works, or even a single individual, like figure out what works before all the compliance and legal, and we think about what that means. The stereotypical way is like, if they can 10x their output, you can learn from that and then roll out elsewhere. And so even when I'm consulting with companies, I'm coming in with the same mindset. Okay, you have, let's say we even narrow it down to like, these are the challenges or these are the opportunities that we want to go to. Let's break it down even further. Your big milestone is like in a year or 3 years out, should be a very efficient or a very technology oriented thing. Good. That's 3 years from today. In 1 year from today, or 6 months from today, how do we go find that person? Let's build out the MVP. If it works, then we're going to scale it. If it works, then we're going to scale it. That way, when you get to a level where your legal or your compliance or someone steps in, it's not a, you can't do that. It's a, this is how far we've gotten. This is where the gray area is that we need to know, like, how do we deal with user privacy? How do we do these things so that we're not triggering anything? Now it's a conversation, not someone getting a proposal and going, are you out of your mind?
Right. There's so many questions I can ask. There's so many directions I can go in. But in the back of my head, as we close down here, there's this one last thing I want to ask you. And I'm trying to formulate in my head what's the best way to ask it, right? Like, I don't want to say what's the new exciting thing that's coming up or what is really fascinating. I want you to tell me the last thing that you heard of where this technology is headed or what it can do for people that you, Nick Howard, were like, holy shit, that's going to be sick.
It's actually a long conversation that I had with a good friend of mine. He's a VC, but he's specifically like an AI startup technology VC. And he's looking at the technology side way ahead. And the thing that I was just talking about is like starting at an individual level. He and I were having a conversation that at the time I was like, oh, that's interesting. Because what he's building is like basically an AI context level for himself. He was like, I am never going to make a presentation or write a memo ever again. I've been doing that, for 20 years. You cannot ask me to write an investment memo. He used to be a presidential speechwriter, He's an amazing presentation guy, but he's also just like, I'm done with that. But so what he started doing is he built individual AI context layer, which is he uses Claude, Anthropic's. But basically is he will, and one of the things that's fun is he just talks to his computer now. He doesn't type. He just like found a tool he just talks and it's pretty accurate. If I read an internet link, I will take the link, I will create a note, I will say what's in my head, and then it will drop it into like my AI database, basically. And then at the end of the month, after I see a company, he'll just be like, I will tell the AI, here's what my thoughts on this company, here's their website, write me a memo. And he just writes a memo. And that was really interesting from talking to him about like how he's doing that individually. But later, as I started processing just the basic implementation of how he was using that, there are so many things that on a visual level, I would like to be that. Like, okay, grocery shopping, right? Sounds simple enough. But one of the things I've been mulling over my head is like, what I would love to do when I'm missing something, I just create a voice note. I'm missing this thing. And then like on a given day, like Friday, when I'm walking out the door, I should just have a message that pops up and says, here are all the things that you're shopping for. We have already searched like the best deals and figured out which grocery store you should go to. And here's the list, and you go. And the efficiency of that is not like, oh, it's technology. It's just, I don't want to think about grocery shopping. I don't want to, because, my habit would be like, I probably wrote one sticky note on the refrigerator. I probably have another one on my computer. And now I got to go track those things down. And, arguably is I could be more efficient about it. But the reverse would just be, is there are certain things like that. It knows if I say I want milk, the context layer of that should be is like, I probably have a specific brand. I probably have like a specific fat percentage. I probably have like a price that, takes it out of like what I'm willing to pay. When I say that one word, all of that context should just come into play and then go out. Or like other implementations of that, I like to read a lot, both physical books, online, or a group of friends and I, like we send articles of different things back to each other. What that usually means is I have about 800 tabs in my web browser. I will get to this at some point. I would love to have those tabs. I would love to not read them. And I would love for the AI to like just pre-browse it on Monday morning. Listen, based on your reading habits, here's 5 things. Here's a summary. Would you like to read it? And I can just like, yeah, no, yeah. And then it's not guilt, but then I'm not looking at my web browser. You know what? I'm just going to delete these because I'm not going to get to them. Because some of them could have really good insights. And so that's, to me, where again, it's still about my preference. It's still about my habit. But there are certain things I wish that it's like, again, I just have my personal AI and I want to do this thing. And then I don't need to do the research. It's just like, here's that. And we're at an individual level that can be built with a bit of work. It's going to become more efficient later. And then at a corporate level, again, everything I just described is what's the expansion of that? It's just like you, Mike Ryan, go, I have an idea. Now, most of the time, either someone needs to know you really well, or you got to spend a crap ton of time like, let me give you every detailed nuance of that. But it would also be even better to be like, I have an idea. AI goes, okay, here's usually how Mike thinks about these things. Ayla thinks about these things differently. Mike didn't say this. Let me pull some research. And then, Ayla, here's a memo. And it's still your idea, but it's in her thought process or her way of speaking. And so you can be you, she can be her, but that bridge is made.
It is utterly fascinating. I was just going to say to you, I'm like, I can only imagine what the next 10 years is going to bring. But then in my brain, I'm like, 10 years, 2 years, right? Like it's happening so fast. Nick Howard, Amble & Co., thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. I think I learned something. I hope everybody else did.
Yeah, I had a blast. Thanks so much for having me on, and definitely keep talking.
Thanks again.